Okay, I want to go back and verify some of the concepts that I felt were missing from the assignments that I got. Just review them and answer some of the questions that I felt weren't answered well in the last class. One of your assignments actually inspired you to visit the role of ethics. In that, I spoke primarily about ethics in the role of how it compares research to the researcher, but I also want to talk about how it affects the subject as well. So we're going to be talking about that. Briefly break down the hypotheses, because I feel like from what we feel like some of you got the entire. Can you not hear? Too quiet, or is it because can you not? Okay, she fixes that problem. I guess we can continue. Everybody else can hear okay, right? There's no any issues. Everybody hear okay, right? I'm still connected.
We can hear.
Okay. I think that'd be an issue with her then. I hope she figure out. Okay, let's just continue while she tries. But the real meat of this class that I want to focus on is I want to look at the structure of an academic research paper. Guys, I think we're just going to wait for a little second. She gets another device. So just on for a bit. For those of you who have just joined, we're just waiting for a brief moment that one of the students can get another device to hear the class. I think she was having problems with hearing me, so we're a bit longer and see if she'll come back. Now? Perfect. Okay, so just mute the mic, if you will, and we can carry on. Okay. So we look in the structure of research. We're also going to be looking through some real paper, and one example of a paper that I did, I'm just going to be analyzing it. Can whoever that is use the mic, please? Can you mute the mic? Hi. I think you're doing good.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, but mute the mic, please.
Pardon?
Can you mute the mic?
Yeah, sure. Just a minute. I can't see the icon. Yeah.
You can't. There we go. I think you're good. Okay. So the phone address is the issue I had with the vagueness and the broadness of some of your research questions. Now, this was not a universal problem, but I did feel enough of you shared this problem that I want to address it here. A lot of your research questions are too broad. They are asking questions that are practically, that could be the subject of an entire field of study rather than one specific experiment. So you guys to remember to try and focus it and narrow it. And I know it's my own fault because I clarified this last time, but a research question is not the same thing as just a topic, if that makes sense. A research question is much more narrow in focus, and it's much more applicable in scope. So I understand that there is a little bit of a contradiction here. I'm due to both be narrow and broad in a sense, but this tension between breadth and depth is one that you will find throughout your professional careers if you do follow it along. Because you want it as broad as possible, because then more people will be interested, but you want to have the depth and the narrowness so that you can actually test out your ideas and get some answers. So it's just experience, you know, you'll just learn this as you go along. Another point that I want to clarify is the transition from question to hypothesis, prediction to experiment. Some of you thought that the hypothesis itself was the question. This is not the case. The hypothesis is the best get at an answer to the question. So the hypothesis should never be a question, right? And some of you got the question and the hypothesis perfectly, but you went straight from the hypothesis to the experiment, and you didn't clarify on what your prediction was. And I think it would seem a little redundant to hypothesis and a prediction. What the prediction allows you to do is show your thought process, why you're experimenting on what you're doing and how that relates to your guess. So it's kind of like in math, like it's just to show you did what you did, and so then that allows people to get an idea of what was going through your head. So sure that when you're doing for now anyway, be sure to go to all these steps. Once you get to an advanced level, you're not going to have to follow the strict frame anymore. And so moving forward, there's going to be another assignment this week, and I think it's going to tie in very nicely to that class in which we'll be studying literature reviews. But I want to talk a bit about assignment participation. There were some of you that did send in the assignments, and I can totally understand, you guys are probably going through finals. I know I am, and you might not have the time to do something for an extracurricular course that's not even being graded. But at least trying them out, because hoping them in a way that take you more than 30 to 40 minutes of your time, and will be very easy and quick to complete. And it also allows me to get an idea of where you guys are and what points I need to focus on. So it's a very mutually beneficial thing. So advice. Okay, let's get started. The ethics of research. I wanted to come back to that. In the last class, we spoke about Oppenheimer, who was a nuclear physicist that created the atomic bomb, or at least helped to. We also talked about some Italian geologists that were prosecuted for their failure to predict a earthquake. But that's primarily, we were talking about how research can affect the scientist, right? But when you're on humans specifically, and this is often the case in psychology, the biggest concern ethics is how you're the patient or the subject. So the two famous psychology experiments that we can discuss ethics in the context of. So in 1961, I have to go on. Okay, so in 1961, a Yale psychologist named Stanley Milgram, who the experiment was named after, he sought to try to devise an experiment with which he could test the question: could it be the accomplices to the Holocaust were just following orders? And this might seem like a totally like out of ballpark question, but in the context of that age, in 1961, a infamous officer named Adolf Eichmann was on trial, and what people were really confused about when they were seeing the trial was how ordinary Adolf Eichmann seemed. He was not an evil, sadistic monster. He was an ordinary bureaucrat. And we're trying to wrap their heads around, how can such an ordinary man do such incredibly cruel, depraved things? What he did was he sent out an announcement, and he set out subjects that were willing to come in and spend an hour with him. And the experiment that he devised was the following. The patient, which is in this case little t, because after teacher, that was what the study referred to them as. The subject is asked to press a button every time that the learner, labeled L, gets the answer wrong. And what the subject doesn't know is that the learner is not just another subject. The learner is actually a trained actor. And every time the teacher presses the button, the learner pretends as though they are experiencing pain. And the experimenter is clad in a very professional white coat, and he asks the teacher to input more and more electricity and increase the power of each shock. And what we found was through the experimenter, the subject was willing to administer huge doses of shock to the learner. Remember, the subject thinks that the learner is, in fact, just another normal person being administered shocks. And what we found was they were even willing to go all the way and administer 450 volts, which is enough to kill a person. And this is a shocking study at the time, because people thought that normal, good Americans would not be able to stand for mistreating other people in these kinds of experiments. But what Stanley found was, in fact, they're all prey to these, to these basic human psychology. But what I talk about primarily with this is the ethics of this. This experiment would never be allowed to run today in any normal psychology journal. Subjects reported facing incredible amounts of emotional trauma. Some had nervous seizures. They were weeping and crying and going into hysterics. So a lot of that kind of emotional trauma is no longer an ethical practice that science does today. And another thing that I want to highlight, Stanford prison experiment. So about 10 years after the Stanley Milgram did his test, Stanford's a psychologist named Philip Zimbardo. He examined a similar topic, but it was the between soldiers and prisoners of war. So what he did was he pretty much simulated a prison in the basement of his lab, and he chose 24 students and chose them specifically for their emotion and for their lack of criminal history and such. Because the hypothesis was that the reason why guards beat their prisoners and traumatize them was because guards are like there's something wrong with them. So try to pick the most normal students he could find. And fortunately happened was in 6 days, in 6 short days, normal students did it into acts of utter barbarity, like they were getting students to strip naked. Could you mute the mic again? Thank you. They were students to defecate into buckets, and they would use to clean them up. They were locking students into solitary confinement closets. So this is another example of just basic human psyche, and it's also another example of how ethically research can be. This is we're forced to deal with not emotional trauma, but also physical trauma. And this is just another example of a study that would never be done today. I want to talk about the hypothesis a bit. But like some guys were maybe a little confused about what the hypothesis is trying to do. And I just want to talk about that it's a theoretical concept, right? It's designed to streamline and systematize the practice of science and research. It's not ultimate mandate that you have to believe on faith. It's just a tool, right? It's just an instrument that allows you to think about how to do your experiment and how to run your test. It doesn't mean that it doesn't have its own faults. If you look at the sources on this slide, one of the sources is a study called The Brief History of the Hypothesis, and you can see some of the criticisms that have towards this tool. It's also not the only tool, right? There's a tool called the null hypothesis, which represents the theory that the researcher is attempting to nullify with this test. And in this example here. By the way, if anyone has any questions, free to interrupt me. You'll need to wait for my prompt. So the null hypothesis is just the opposite of the actual experimental guess, in that the null is what you're trying to disprove. So your actual hypothesis is that aliens stealing your socks, then the null hypothesis is that it's not aliens, it's something else. And this is a very good tool when you're studying things statistically, especially. In psychology, you'll find the null hypothesis being used a lot. We'll be talking about this in a later class entitled Fundamental Statistics. So I think that will make more sense in that context. Have any questions so far?
Can putting a hypothesis make the research a little more biased towards what you want to actually prove?
That
if I give
right. Go ahead.
For example, like if I put a hypothesis stating that this should happen at the end of my research or experiment, so I try to modify things so that the hypothesis comes true. So sometimes in some research projects, don't you think that the hypothesis actually makes one a little more biased towards that result?
Yes, that's like you really put it well what the study that I referred to says, and that's the most common criticisms using this tool, that it naturally, like even if we don't, even if it's subconscious, we tend to naturally try and make our hypothesis true. So that's a very good point. But I would argue that the reason that this tool is still widely used is it allows us to really devise good testable ideas that we can go and experiment on. So that's a great point, and it's something to be aware of. I would still argue personally that it's an excellent tool so that we can think about what our next steps should be, if that makes sense. Okay. But we're going to be getting into the real meat of this class. We're going to be looking at this of a paper. So these 5 things they essentially the research process. So the introduction, the methods, the results, the definition, and then finally listing all your sources. So we're examining each of these in more detail as we carry on here. Introduction, it tries to establish relevant context for the research, and especially this is important when you're trying to advertise your work for people that might not know all the details of your particular topic. So articulates the thesis, your hypothesis, if you have one, the general motive behind doing it. Primarily, what I want you guys to focus on is what of your research is, like what gap that you're trying to fill. As I mentioned in the last class, it's best to have a point. It's best to have a significance for what you're trying to achieve. Not just doing it for the sake of doing it, you're trying to achieve a specific goal. And so you express that aim and outline it.
Can you repeat the previous slide?
Carry on.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, talk about the introduction, and now I want to talk about the methods. This is essentially your experiment. You are talking about what you used and your methodology and the procedures, and it's typically the most straightforward section, and it can be done first. I usually do this section first because it helps me remember and think about my experiment in the context of to let other people know about it. And it's found most often in very empirical subjects like biology, chemistry, psychology, and medicine, because subjects have a vast amount of different methodologies that you could be using, and you clarify which one that you're using for the test. But such as philosophy and more humanities subjects, there's not a lot of different kinds of methodologies, so it would be redundant to list your procedure when everyone is following the same procedure. So, but many of you are interested in more empirical subjects, so make sure to list properly. And one other detail is that this is the section that allows other people to replicate your study, and this is an integral part of science, and so really focus on getting this right. Okay, for the section, this is the just in some ways you want to report on the results of your data collection. And it's usually done in table, in charts, in graphs. And that's because it's very easy to highlight points that you want to make. So you could waste, 1,000 words trying to describe something, or you could just really easily and cleanly put it in a table. But if your data is of the nature that just is unable to be in table form, then definitely okay to just summarize it in words. Okay, moving. This is what I want to focus on because, in my opinion, this is pretty crucial to the idea of further human knowledge that we were talking about in last class. So far we've been kind of describing what we've been doing. This section, interpret and comment on it. This kind of shows you, which it's known as the hourglass notion of it, of research. And you start with broad, then you narrow down, and then you experiment, and then you analyze it, and then and it comes back around to generalizing. You're trying to put your data in the context of other research that's being done. You're trying to relate findings to larger problems, and what you guys will find when you're really when you look at the structure of a paper is that the structure is very similar to the structure of research itself. You know, in the introduction, you're beginning with a context, then you're narrowing, you're focusing, you do the experiment, and then you generalize back again. Very good image to keep in your head when you're doing this form of research. Okay. Any questions that you want me to address? I think we're good. I'm sure if you guys can see that or not.
Question. In literature reviews, we won't typically be collecting data as such. So, what's the because?
Yeah, that's a good question. We're actually going to be the next class is going to be focusing on the literature review specifically. But what a literature review allows you to do is provide context that you're going to be talking about in the introduction. So it doesn't really follow the exact of this structure that I'm talking about here. This is a paper that you're going to be doing after you do the review, after you've established the context, and it's time for you to actually get new data and create stuff of your own.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. So this is what I use when I'm writing my discussion sections. Do you have a question?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
For example, the papers can be like, for example, if I think that I'm following a method and I'm assuming that the person knows that this is how it is. But if, for example, you do not know, so can I add a report on that particular subject as an annexure later on? Is that, can it be done in a paper or not?
Sorry, could you repeat the question? Are you saying that yeah.
For example, in my case, as a P injunction, which I had submitted to you.
Yeah.
So not everybody knows what is P injunction and how it works. So shall I add an annexure later on in my report, in my paper stating what is it, everything about it, or shall I include it in my report project?
I see. Okay.
Paper.
Well, if you want to go into extensive detail about that particular specific topic, then I would suggest you might want to include that in some form of appendix, and that's usually how it's done. Its introduction is more just a quick summary of all the relevant details that one needs in order to appreciate the data that's being reviewed. So you definitely don't want to bombard the reader with too much in the introduction. That could save for if they have interest, then you would include that in some form of appendix. Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So this is the 9-step process that I usually use. This is my template when I'm writing analyses. It's kind of what we've been talking about. It just helps me to always ask these crucial points to size some of the big information and background. I want to restate crucial value or the crucial statement. So basically, you want to, in your discussion, you want to boil all your results down into one cruise or sentence or number, right? And if you have an unexpected outcome that you didn't expect based on your guess, then you want to expand on that and maybe try and explain why you got that outcome, and you might rest which being done for that purpose. And so one important point is you want to establish your limitations. Every paper, every methodology has its own set of its own limitations, and addressing that in your own paper is vital, so that you can kind of avoid people criticizing you for that. If you can criticize yourself, it seems like a much better strategy. And important is to use the entire paper to recommend why further research should be done and how it might be done. And this is an important point that you should that everybody should put at the end of their papers. I'm sure you guys have already done bibliographies and references. This is just the particular style I use. I believe it's the MLA style. There are other styles that might be more appropriate to specific subjects. That there's the APA style. There's the Chicago style, which I think is primarily used for I believe, but I might be wrong there. But this is just the MLA style that I use in my papers. But what I want to highlight the point is that make sure that all your sources are as valid as possible, and really research not only into what they're saying, but who's saying it. Are they being sponsored by companies who have a conflict of interest? Are there some crazy person on the internet that no one trusts? So really trust, and for every source, make sure that it's a valid one, that it's a sound one, and that no one can come back at you for including. And these are sources just to give you an example of used. I like to highlight especially a brief history of the hypothesis. If I think one had a question about it, so I think that's a pretty interesting read on other alternate methods on how to do science other than using this tool. I want to get into some sample papers. I guess I should ask, anybody have any questions about this? This is going to be the last thing we do here. Okay. So this is the paper that I wrote. This is my latest paper. I was not the only one. I had all my teammates. This was published in January of 2015. And it's the can everybody see this? Okay, not just so it highlights the box. So that is, again, the context of this. If you guys are interested in the study itself, I can just send it to you. But basically, what it's addressing is the habit of reviewers, of peer reviewers, to cite their own material, even out of context, even if it's not necessary. Because the way science works is it uses this peer review to make sure that every article is as excellent and vigorous as possible. But a lot of peer reviewers that we found tend to do is that they cite their own material in order to make their points, and often it's completely irrelevant to the point that they're making, and because it helps their own reputation, right? If we their work. So this study focuses on how abundant that practice is. You can see that the introduction deliver some context on how peer review works, on how prevalent it is across medical journals, and how self-citing your work can be a conflict of interest. We detail some of the methods here. I think this is a paper that you can read. It's a very simple paper, and there's no hard terminology. You can really read through and just understand what we were trying to do. So basically, what our process was that we looked at comments for one journal for 1 year, and this was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of comments. And we went through each comment and can one student asked me, can papers be patented? I'm not sure about the specific patent law. Nature patent system has its own methodology that you submit to the office. So I don't think papers as such can be patented. No, I'm going to go with no, but I'm not the expert on that. Okay, so what we did was we looked at these comments and we tried to figure out who was own material and try to figure out if they were citing their own material for a good reason or just a bad reason, right? And me and Alex, which is my teammate's project, we spent hours and hours and hours just going through each comment. And so it goes to show you, like, this is at the day, this is work, you know. And so, and this is our methodology, again, in graphical form. You'll get a lot of research journals, if you ever get into the field, really appreciates results and being displayed in a more graphic manner, because it's much more interesting and it's like that a lot more. Tool that we use that basically encapsulates our entire year of work for in one table. Yeah. If you do this, give me let me know. This is just one example of a very simple paper, but now I want to highlight the potential of how interesting research can be. It's not to say that my paper is not interesting, but it's very normal. You know, that's the kind of paper that any lab is going to be submitting every month. You know, but this is a paper that was submitted into Nature, which is the most prestigious journal in the world, and it's just like, I barely understand this, but just looking through this and way that they've graphically and intuitively helped us understand this is inspiring. And at the same time, they use the exact same structure that we were talking about. They try and provide a context. They elaborate on how they did it. They go through the data that they collected, and then they discuss the potential of further research. Excellent papers. And what I want you guys to do for your assignment, and this is going to be the last slide, what I want you guys to do for your assignment is find a research paper that is relevant to the topic that you want to study, and you can visit it has a lot of free scientific articles. It's where I get my information. And find one that is appropriate for your topic. It doesn't have to be the one that you sent in for last assignment, but just one that you find interesting. And you to summarize briefly each of those sections that we talked about, and know how you can use it in your own research of interest, and send that. Next week we're going to be talking about reviews, so I feel like it's going to be a good intro. Do you have a question? Anybody have a question?
For example, sir, I had submitted you a report, a research report. So it already has all those things. they mention things. So do I again need to write the summary of each of them again? Like,
Well, what I want you to do here is find another research paper, right? Like I believe
no,
in your report. Go ahead.
yeah, you please continue.
I'm saying that the point of this exercise is to get you familiar with how the professionals structure their own papers. So it's not
Was
really
it a proper structure follow, or should I modify it, or read
the
it?
specifics of your project itself. I think I'll talk about that with you privately, if that's okay with you.
Okay.
But for this assignment, I just wanted to get a really intuitive grasp on each of these points. Okay, and for that, does anybody have any more questions?
Research project have more than one hypothesis.
Yes, but you do have to remember that they're just tools. These are just instruments. There's no hard and fast rules for exactly how it has to be done. But I would recommend at this stage of research that it's better to focus on one specific idea and one specific guess and one specific prediction rather than build prediction upon prediction. That's my opinion. Anyway, I was very overwhelmed by the entire process when I was young. So, but if you guys feel like you can match multiple hypotheses and build it all into a functional report, then okay, and that's it. We're going to be having another class on Tuesday that's going to be focusing on the literature review. So, if you have any confusions or you're struggling to find a paper, just contact me and I can definitely help you out. Okay, any questions? I think that's it, guys. Okay, whether you can find the research papers in the link, and the answer is yes. If we just go back to that slide very quickly. Oh, sorry, it was that slide. So I'm a fool. You can find our site. You can find books on that site. You can find pretty much anything on that site that's in written form. Just the exact search engine is a little hard to navigate. So if you're having trouble with that, let me know and I'll try and run through that with you. But yes, you can definitely find free science articles from a major publication. Otherwise, I think that's it, guys. I'm gonna stick around for 5 more minutes or so in case anybody has any questions. But thank you all so much for joining me, and thank you very much to those of you who completed the assignments last week. It was a real pleasure to read through all of them and read how deeply you are engaging with this process. So thank you.